Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here on our Nerd to Nerd cast show thingy. um, we have B. David Walters as our amazing co-host today, who is extremely talented. He is on Geek and Sundry. He does many shows there. One of my favorites, which is, tell me if I'm saying this wrong. Oh, you're going to have to help me.
Vampire the Masquerade, LA by Night.
Yes, LA by
Mm-hmm,
Night. That's the part.
mm-hmm.
Great. I really do like this show. My brain's just stopped working about a month ago. So,
You know, time is a flat circle. Like, I mean, has it been a month? Has it been 8 years? Even I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah. But thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it.
and our amazing Monsignor of Guest, amazingly talented writer of television, comics, and animation, and creator of my childhood and many of yours, who wrote G.I. Joe and the Transformers and shaped so many of our childhood lives.
Don't leave out Jem and My Little Pony.
Oh my goodness, no kidding. We were just actually having a deep, huge conversation about Jem the other day. So, yes.
Honestly, I didn't know that. I was today years old when I found out you also did Jem and My Little Pony. And I told you years ago that you basically raised me, Buzz. So now I know you basically raised all of us. So great. Awesome. Yeah.
Well, I had 5 brothers, so I was watching G.I. Joe and Transformers more than anything else. So
Yeah.
Honestly, almost all little boys watch Jem. It was like a low-key secret. Like, it came on right before like the G.I. Joe Transformers block, and like many little boys watched Jem. Trust me.
yeah, well, bronies is a thing, you know? So my brother has 3 girls. He's like, yeah, dude, total brony. Are you kidding me? I'm like,
Yeah.
When we were working at Sunbow, we would get these boxes of toys from Hasbro, and literally just whatever was the latest product, and it'd be filled with G.I. Joes, Transformers, all kinds of stuff. I had daughters, so I had claim on the Gems and the ponies. That meant I couldn't get any Joes or Transformers. So everybody else scored the Joe and Transformer toys, but I'm bringing home box loads of Gem dolls and My Little Ponies. So
that must have been amazing. Yeah.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that is actually my question for you, Buzz. How did that come about, since such a vital, awesome role that you played? How did that evolve?
Well, how exactly do you mean that? How did I get into the business, or how did I get specifically at Sunbow during that period of time? Because it's kind of all on a spectrum in a way.
You choose.
Well, I had been drafted when I was still in high school back in 1972. I mean, I was still in high school. I got my draft notice and I thought, oh boy, this is great. You know, I just go in, tell them I'm a high school student, and they go, oops, our bad, and they forget all about it. And they looked at it and they said, we'll be back in touch. And they called me back a few weeks later and said, well, we checked with your school and you're set to graduate. So you're right, we can't draft you now, but the moment you graduate, we've got you. And so 3 days after I graduated, I was in the Army. At the end of that Army tour, by then I was married, I had a daughter, and I had applied to USC's film school and was accepted. And I decided with my wife that we would come out to Los Angeles early, because I was discharged in February and school didn't start until about October. But we decided we'd come out to Los Angeles early, we'd get settled down, find a place to stay. And I thought, well, you know, let me just go around all the studios and see if I can find a job as a driver or a mailroom or something like that, just to get my feet wet before going to film school. Make a very long story short, I worked my way all the way down to Filmation Studios, and I go in and said, I'd like to drop off my resume. And the receptionist said, well, do you work in animation or live action? Well, I don't know anything about animation. So I said, well, I guess live action. She said, wait a moment. And she went in the back, and their live action producer was a wonderful gentleman named Arthur Nadell. And Arthur was bored out of his mind, because what I didn't know was this was what they called hiatus season. This was that period of time between the end of production on the previous season and before the networks actually bought something for the next season. And so Arthur's just back there with nothing to do. And he says, yeah, send the guy in. Let me talk to him. Let me kill an afternoon. Very long story short, because of that, it opened a door for me to be able to write a script for them. They liked it enough that they put me on staff. When October rolled around, I thought, well, you know, I'm making a living now. I'm actually supporting a wife and child writing cartoons. I can put off film school for a year or two and just do this. Film school never came around. I just kept writing. So that's how I got to where I was. As far as Sunbow and, you know, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Gem, My Little Pony, all of that specifically, again, after I left Filmation, I ended up at Ruby Spears. I met Steve Gerber there. Steve left Ruby Spears and was working on the Sunbow shows. I was not considered to be one of the staff writers for the first round of you know, people they were hiring for the Sunbow shows. But if you've seen the original G.I. Joe miniseries, you know, they've got like jets swooping down and cutting tanks in half with their wingtips, and they've got sergeants giving orders to colonels and things like this. And Steve said, would you take a look at a couple of our scripts? Because I know you were in the Army, just give us some feedback. And I basically gave him feedback that made it, you know, a little less ridiculous. And he told Hasbro, said, you should hire Buzz to be the technical advisor on the show and just, you know, make sure we don't make any egregious mistakes. Well, they didn't have anything in the budget for a technical advisor, but they could squeeze in one more staff writer. And very quickly, I did a freelance script for them, was almost immediately hired on staff. I very quickly became the unofficial assistant story editor for Steve, and then I was the official assistant story editor. And then for the second season of G.I. Joe, I was the story editor for the series. So that's what got me into the Sunbow office. We were doing, I think at our high water mark, we had something like 135 episodes of various shows in one stage of production or another. And around the office, the analogy would be like a freight train slowly going by a train station. Every day, something's got to go in the boxcar. If it's a good thing, wonderful, but it's got to be something. And we had to learn to write and edit fast. We had to get stuff done quickly and fast and get it in the hopper. And if you were, you know, I was officially a Joe writer, but the truth was if they had a hole in the Transformers schedule and there was a gap for me, they'd say, Buzz, go write a Transformer. So I'd pop over, I'd write a pop over and staying in the same desk. But I would write a Transformer. Later as Gem and My Little Pony came along, we actually used the little ponies as palate cleansers because, you know, there's only so many robot bashing, Cobra fighting stories you can do before you start to get a little burned out and you go, let me do a pony. Let me just get something different. And that was also the appeal of Gem because Gem was so radically different from everything else we were doing. It got you to think about stories in a different way. You didn't fall back on the old tropes that we would be using on Transformers and Joe. So that's how I ended up writing for all of these different shows at Sunbow.
I mean, Gem is adventure. Gem is excitement.
And it's a palette cleaner too, is our new.
You know, my two favorite parts about that story, besides all of it, is the fact that you did what you had to do to go around to the studios and like humble yourself and talk to people and be willing to start at the bottom, and it worked out. I know a lot of people look at things like that and it's like, oh, it's the right place, right time. That could never happen to me, but they're missing the part of it. One, the actions you yourself took and the relationships that you yourself took the time to form, but also even I'm sure at the time when you got drafted, I mean, in retrospect, it was no big deal, but that was probably pretty scary at the time. And
Well,
then, it worked
yeah,
out so well.
yeah. It's kind of interesting because if you've seen Ken Burns' documentary, his miniseries on the Vietnam War, what I didn't know at the time was that Nixon had told the military, do not send any draftees to Vietnam because, it was devastating for somebody to be drafted, a 19-year-old to be drafted, sent to Vietnam, and something terrible happened to him. And so if you were drafted, you were sent overseas, but you were sent to Korea, you were sent to Germany, someplace like that. And career soldiers, people who had volunteered for it, they ended up getting reassigned to Vietnam. So they drafted me, but they basically drafted me to take somebody else's place when they shipped them off to Vietnam. And I was in the Army, I was in Korea just at the time that they started winding down the Vietnam War. And so all these guys were coming back from Vietnam and they were sending them to Korea for 6 months to depressurize before they went home. Because these guys were twitchy, I got to tell you.
They needed to write a little pony.
Yeah, they should have. We had a thing happen one time where in my office, the public affairs office, there was a loud bang. It wasn't a firearm, but it was a loud bang. And it was loud enough to be heard in the commander's office, which was just down the hall. And people came in to see what happened. And we explained, well, it was nothing big. It was just a little thing. And apparently one of the guys who was a Vietnam vet, when he heard the bang, he just vanished. We didn't see him for the rest of the day. He just fled the building. And at the time, it seemed amusing, but now I'm looking back and I'm feeling, kind of bad about the fact that this guy who was trying to depressurize ended up getting spooked because of some dumb thing we did. So.
I have a question. When you were doing these shows, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and all that stuff, at what point in the process did you realize that these shows were a big deal? Because at first, because by then you'd worked on Scooby-Doo and done things like that already by this point, right? Or
Not
no?
Scooby-Doo. I had done Thundar the Barbarian. I had worked on a bunch of other shows. I worked with Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, who had created Scooby-Doo. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten a bit of a reputation, part good, part bad, for being, I won't say problematic, but being demanding in what I was trying to do, because I really disliked the kind of Saturday morning story that was, Joker steals the Eiffel Tower and Batman has to get it back. And as I would say at the time, I said, who is going to miss a meal because the Eiffel Tower is stolen? Who's going to have their life disrupted or harmed because, something happened to the Eiffel Tower? And I kept trying to do stories where there was something relatable in it, where the kids, or not just the kids, but the audience watching it goes, well, yeah, I can understand why this is important to that character. Between Ruby Spears and Sunbow, I worked on Dungeons and Dragons. I did one script for them. And again, this was a situation where they had closed down. They had gotten all the scripts that they needed for the first season. And as more of a courtesy to me than anything else, they let me pitch. And I pitched something that was so good in their eyes, they said, well, we got to take this. And they bought it and they animated it. And that one was called Quest of the Skeleton Warrior. And that was to me a major stepping stone in my writing career, because for the first time I got to write an adversary who had a completely understandable, and you could sympathize with his motives. He was a knight who had been turned into a living skeleton, and he wants to get turned back into a regular person, and the bad guy is saying, well, I can do that for you if you help me get these kids. And so for the first time, I was able to do a story about somebody who's doing a bad thing for a completely understandable, rational reason. And he's not an out and out villain. He's a guy that's caught between two terrible choices.
It's like a Vincent Price had that quote, "I don't play monsters, I play men beset by fate and seeking revenge."
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an actor recently who said, I don't play bad guys, and his director said, don't play it as a bad guy. Play it as someone who thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's doing the wrong thing. But in his eyes, he's doing what's right. So
Yep. The villain's always the hero of their story. Yep.
Yeah. Malcolm McDowell said one of the best bits of acting advice he ever got was on Caligula, that crazy movie that he made for Penthouse. And he got it from Peter O'Toole, who played, if I remember correctly, Peter O'Toole played Augustus, And O'Toole told Malcolm McDowell, he said, enjoy what you're doing as the villain. The audience will eat it up. The audience will be following you, and they'll keep it. He said, don't play him as tormented or in doubt or anything. You just have a good time playing the villain, and they'll be there. They'll follow you. And that's what separates a villain like a Cobra Commander, like a Serpentor, from the Skeleton Warrior. The Dixon, that was his name. That's what separates them, is because Dixon is not to get too fancy here, he's a tragic character, someone you feel sorry for. And you recognize there's not going to be a happy ending to this particular story, because he can't get what he wants without harming someone else. And he has to make the choice between, do I harm someone else, or do I throw that away just to satisfy myself? Cobra Commander, of course, couldn't care less. He would sacrifice any number of, Cobra troopers to get what he wanted.
Do you have
Oh, no, go ahead, please, go ahead.
So do you have a favorite? Not to call favorites, but.
The favorite of the Joes, or
a
shows?
Favorite of the shows. Not just the Joes, but all the shows.
I think G.I. Joe was the high water mark for me. I got to do more of what I wanted to do in terms of character development, of story conflicts. I got to write at a higher level than anything I had done previously. I did a two-parter for G.I. Joe called The Traitor, where one of the Joes has a mother who has a chronic illness, and he can barely afford to take care of her. And Cobra basically approaches him and says, look, we can give you a little bit of money. Just let us know where Joe is going to be so we can avoid him. And, for kids watching the show, it's like, well, son of a gun, yeah, if my mom was sick and the only way to take care of her was to sell out G.I. Joe, I might be tempted to sell out G.I. Joe. I might be tempted to turn on my friends to save my mom. And of course, in the end, we find out it was all an undercover operation. He told the Joes from the beginning, and they were all working in this to fool Cobra. But for 2 episodes, until the very end, the kids are wondering, has he become a bad guy? Has he gone over to the other side? There were a lot of shows that I worked on that had moments that I was very happy with. There was a show that I worked on that my script never got made because it was supposed to start with a 5-part miniseries and then go into 26 episodes. And the financing fell through after the first 5-parter, but it was a science fantasy show out of Toronto. One of the best setups that I'd ever seen. I mean, best in the sense of all the characters had some kind of emotional conflict with their position in the story. There was no outright villain. There was no outright hero. And it was a delight to work on this show because, for once you got to, take off the white hat, black hat thing and look at issues, look at why people did things, what their motives were. And you couldn't automatically assume this person was bad because they were the antagonist. You couldn't automatically assume this person is good because they're the protagonist. You had to evaluate what it was they were doing. And that one, as I said, 5 episodes and that was it. So I don't even think it got a DVD release, which is heartbreaking.
How far into this did you realize that like these shows were a big deal? Did like Transformers, G.I. Joe, even My Little Pony, Jim, those are kind of the defining series of like the childhood of millions. Like how far into it did you realize like this wasn't just another gig, like this is like a thing?
I think when the kid locked himself in the closet after they killed off Optimus Prime, that was when we realized.
Yo, I told you that, but I cried so much in the movie theater when that happened. And my mom was like, it genuinely traumatized me. And I think, honestly, in the fullness of time, maybe it kind of did, really. Like, I know now about the toy lines and all that. Like, now I know. But then, no idea. No idea. Oh, and thank you, by the way, for letting Duke live. I mean, we don't have to go too far into that, but like, yeah.
No. Duke was dead. I killed him.
How
dead.
dare you? How dare you? Oh, the slow motion snake biting into his heart. Yeah. And then them being like, good news, Duke's gonna make it.
Yeah.
No,
what
I wouldn't have made it.
Was,
I wouldn't have made it. I was those children, and I'm here to tell you, I would not have made it.
Well, here's what the backstory on that. We would cycle characters and vehicles and stuff out of the product lines. So if you're watching the show, any of the shows, you might notice that certain characters didn't appear, certain characters in season 1 didn't appear in season 2 and so on. And that was because they were just cycled out of the product line. And we tried on G.I. Joe to make some allusion to that. We did one episode, Worlds Without End, where several of the Joes go to a parallel world where Cobra has won and they're going to start the fight against Cobra in this parallel world. Those were Joes that were going to be cycled out of the product line. So we thought, well, we'll have them cycle out heroically. They'll go and continue the fight in another dimension. Sparks, our very first Camo guy, he popped up in season 2 as a civilian. The Joes needed some kind of technical reference and they just, they call him up, he's left the army and he's now working in a civilian communications firm. But we brought him back just for that so that we could show there was some continuity. They told us they were going to dump Duke from the product line. They didn't realize how iconic these characters were. Yeah. They thought we can just introduce a brand new set of characters every year and people will accept it. So they were going to dump Duke from the product line. And I said, look, we've been doing this show. We've never killed anybody. When I wrote scripts and when I story edited scripts, I would have references to casualties, which of course means killed and injured. But I could never outright say so many people were killed or actually show somebody dying. So I said, why don't we, if we're going to get rid of Duke from the product line, let's kill him off. Let's give him a nice, big, heroic death and, make it memorable. And they said, wow, that's a great idea. And they went over to the guys doing the Transformer movie and said, while you're at it, kill Optimus Prime too. We're not going to be keeping him in the product line either. Well, the problem was the Transformers was aimed at like the 9 to 10-year-old audience, okay? And G.I. Joe was aimed at about 12 and up. So if you're 9 or 10, chances are you got to go to the movies with your mom or dad if you want to see a movie. So the kids go to see Transformers. They're all geared up. They want to have a good Transformers adventure. And then about halfway through it, we kill Optimus Prime and they freaked out. And their parents are trapped with a bunch of freaking out kids, in the theaters. And one kid, as we said, he went back and he locked himself in his closet for like 2 or 3 days. it really badly affected people. We got a lot of negative feedback from parents. You know, how dare you kill off, you know, a character in a story like this? And, you know, we're thinking, well, you know, they did it to Bambi's mom, you know, but we got a lot of negative feedback. And so at that point, they rewrote the G.I. Joe movie, or rewrote the dialogue, so that Duke survives, even though we inflicted about as fatal an injury on him as you possibly could.
Again, a snake bit into his heart, and then yo, Joe.
Yeah.
I was like, it hurts now. No, the again, now I understand why it was the way it was with Transformers and getting rid of the toy. But it's the opening of Transformers the movie is a horror movie. They're just all dying left and right. And if you remember, there's that one panning shot of all the dead Autobots and Wheeljacks just laying on the top dead.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, what? What?
Well, you see, this again is the problem. This is what got me, part of my reputation was that I was arguing at the time with Sunbow. I was saying, you can't kill a robot. You can smash him, bash him, crush him, run him over with a steamroller, and then you just fix him and he's back for the next episode. You kill a human being, they don't come back. And they said, no, it's fine. We'll do it this way. And of course, Optimus Prime comes back, you know, a few episodes later, because they realize, you know, the kids are really into Optimus Prime. That was the problem with a toy company creating a universe, and seeing, when I say a universe, creating a toy line and seeing it as a line and not recognizing, no, there are going to be individual breakout characters that are going to become super popular. And you've got to be attuned to that, because if you aren't, then you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot and eliminating characters that people really love.
Yeah, it was fairly recent that I learned. I mean, obviously I knew there was a correlation between the toys and the animation. Even then as a child, I realized, I'm like, there's an intrinsic connection here. But it was fairly recent that I found out that, especially with things like He-Man and the GoBots and things, that it's like they were toys first. And then it was like, now we need a vehicle to sell these things. But it's interesting how companies have these different reactions, where at least during that time you had this kind of like rotating conveyor belt of characters and toys, whereas you take like what DC and Warner Brothers have done and made some of their characters monoliths. Like, no, they cannot change. You know, like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, you know, they must remain relatively fixed in time and space.
Yeah.
And like, you know, things can rotate around them.
Yeah.
You know, which is equally unfulfilling, but just in a different way. Because then there's no stakes in their stories.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I've kind of drifted away from writing for television, writing for comics and things like that, and I'm focusing on writing my own stuff. At a certain point, I mean, there's certainly an intellectual challenge to trying to fit a story into the box that they hand you. You know, so here's the box, put something in it, and you try to fill it as best you can. But at a certain point, you also realize, well, there's so much more I could do outside of this box, but you're not letting me have the freedom to go outside of that box. And you just recognize, if I want to do something that carries a little more weight and resonance, it has to be a project of my own. And so, you know, I got tired of jumping through other people's hoops. I decided, if I'm going to jump through hoops, I'll jump through hoops of my own making.
Speaking of which, it sounds like you have a vehicle for that you've been using lately. You want to tell us about that?
I write what I call fictoids, which are short stories about 250 to 400 words. I got them. I think I've shown this to you, but my older grandson got me this book for Christmas. And it's got a bunch of writing prompts in it and words that you have to use. And there's only enough space for about 250 to 400 words. And as you can see, I fill them up. So I've been writing these things, you know, just when the mood strikes me. And I been putting them online on my blog, which is www.buzzdixon.com, all one word, BUZZDIXON. And every Tuesday, a new fictoid comes up, a new short story that I've done. And I'm through August of 2021 in advance stories. I've got that many set aside, and I'm only about like 2/3 of the way through this book, but I'm going to keep doing them. There's any number of places where you can get story prompts, and it's a fun thing to do. I typically do 1 or 2 in the evening. If, you know, before I go to bed, I'll just sit down and just start noodling an idea out, typically with no real strong idea of where it's going. I just start writing, and then eventually I find an end within 250 to 400 words. So that's all for free. You can find that on my blog every Tuesday. I am also working on novels, and I'm starting the preliminary work to start writing a novel that I've been toying with for over 10 years now. It was a matter of just finding the time, and thanks to COVID-19, we've got that. Yeah, so I'm basically clearing my deck to do this as the next big project. If I may, one of the things about the COVID-19, the pandemic, we're going to see a break culturally between what was going on before and what happens after. And it is unclear exactly what the post-pandemic world is going to be like, but we know it's going to be different. And we know we have to start, keeping our eyes and ears open and getting prepared for it. And one of the things that I've done is I had a career plan that was set up before the pandemic. And now that the pandemic has come along, I'm starting to think, well, this is going to be a good break point. This is going to be a good relaunch point, and not try to continually go back to what I've done, like the Joe stuff. And not that I'm ashamed of it, not by a long shot. I'm very proud of what we did. But over the last 5 years, almost all the online activity circled around, well, wow, you wrote this great show back then, and this great show, for these guys. I want the future to be, wow, look at this great new thing you've done. And since I'm going to be focusing on books, the fictoids are kind of, to get people aware of and interested in my writing, but the books are where I'm going to be aiming in the future.
Would say, first of all, everybody should be following Buzz on every possible platform, because the man's a genius and everything he says and does is correct. Yeah, he's too humble. Do not listen to him. Read everything he writes, but do not listen to him. I think there's definitely going to be a number of quarantine babies born out of this, both literally and figuratively, of people that with the time finally went and chiseled away at that book or that screenplay or that short film, or finally wrote those songs, a year or two from now, things that really got set in motion during this time are going to see the light of day. Which is a fantastic thing. And I also think, again, pointing out the subtext to this, because a lot of people ask me all the time, like, what it takes to make it in the business, what it takes to be a professional writer, how do you get involved in this? And you've had a career spanning decades and are still consciously, tactically planning the next thing. I think a lot of times there's a very common misnomer, and I hear this all the time, of, for lack of a better word, waiting for inspiration, of just doing things when you feel like it, or when the mood hits. I'm like, if you wait till you feel like it, it's never going to happen.
I got a great story Mickey Spillane told. You think of him as this tough New York guy, but the truth is the moment he could afford it, he left New York and he moved down to South Carolina. He the last 20, 30 years of his life, he lived in South Carolina. And he moved to South Carolina because he loved surf fishing. That's one of the odd things that he and I had in common. We both like surf fishing. But anyway, every morning he'd go out from his house and he'd surf fish for an hour or two, and then he'd come in and he would write. And he said he noticed that the fishing was lasting longer and longer, and the writing was shorter and shorter. And there eventually came a day where he didn't want to go back and write. He just felt like fishing all day long. And he thought to himself, well, this isn't bad. I had a good long run. I did a number of books. I had a bunch of bestsellers. If this is the rest of my life, just surf fishing every day, so be it. And then his accountant called him up and said, you're broke. And he said, it was astonishing how fast the inspiration came back.
So true. Speaking of writing, B. David, so you have just come out with a comic, I understand. Is that correct?
Two things. The trade paperback of the Dungeons and Dragons: A Darkened Wish, all 5 issues are available now, like collected in a trade paperback, which available wherever comics are sold, which at this exact second is not as many places as it used to be. But if you can, buy it online from your local comic shop because they need your help. If not, you can get it Comixology straight through IDW. If you want to be super hardcore, buy the trade and buy the individual issues, because that really makes a big difference to whether or not we're going to get to do more of them, with my co-creator, Tess Fowler, who also is battling cancer right now. And I know many of you donated to the GoFundMe that we set up for her. So thank you very much for that. She and Chris definitely thank you. And we love you, Tess. And yes, I want to be able to tell more of our story and more stories, period. And yes, just as of this recording, this past Sunday morning, the electropunk graphic novel, our Kickstarter funded with my co-creator, Jeff Wamister, which exactly to Buzz's point, we wanted to be able to define the parameters of our sandbox. That it's don't get me wrong, especially for you listening to this, we are not complaining about getting to write Transformers comics or D&D comics or anything of the sort. It is awesome, and it has been a blessing, and we were amazed and lucky to do it. But it is true that anytime you're working in something you didn't create and you're like, I want to burn that down, someone else has to say yay or nay, and they're probably going to say nay. Or they're going to say yes, and the next guy is going to rebuild it, and what you did didn't mean anything. So, that's why it's necessary to have your own place where you get to do your own thing in your own way. And it is amazing and wonderful that this is the part when I have to give my micro speech. If you've listened to me before, I say this all the time, and I'm going to keep beating on it. In the past, we'll say 10 years ago on the low end, 20 years ago on the high end, there were between 50 to 150 people that controlled the entertainment industry. And if you didn't get the rub from one of those people, get invited in to talk, like Buzz's story, that guy was there. It's like, hey, kid, come talk to me. If that guy hadn't been there, Buzz Dixon may not have been Buzz Dixon, period. And now, because of the internet and access, that whole curve has been flattened. You don't need permission anymore to tell your stories. You don't need someone to give you the rub to get you inside. The challenge is neither does anybody else.
Yeah.
So what you do has to stand above what everyone else does. And you accomplish that by, one, actually doing it. The worst thing you write is better than the best thing you did not write. Being a student of your craft and continuing to improve, and just enjoying the process. Because if you don't enjoy it, you won't make it through the crappy times. And there are significant crappy times. But if there is that story that you're thinking about, just like Buzz is talking about now, about writing every day, being a year ahead of schedule, all that stuff, that thing, that story, that song, that movie, that screenplay that's been like tumbling around in your head, do it. Do it, man. Put it down.
There's a writer-director named Sean Baker, and he took one of these and he made a feature film called Tangerine with it. Shot the whole thing on and he shot it on Santa Monica Boulevard. I mean, if you're familiar with the area, you're going, holy cow! I've seen that donut shop. I've been by that vet's office, and he's done a lot of ultra low budget films. The last one he did was the Florida Project with William Dafoe. And I mean, these are just wonderful movies because he focuses on characters going through real life tough situations, and they can be hilariously funny too. I mean, the Tangerine has got, I won't go into it in detail. It's not a kids movie. Let me stress that real heavily. It's not a kids movie, but it's got so many funny bits in it, but it's also got heartbreaking bits in it. And the same thing with the Florida Project. I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anybody. The Florida Project is about this little girl who is living in a motel with her mother in Florida, and they're on, state assistance. And because of that, there are certain arbitrary rules and regulations they have to go through. There's certain things they can and can't do and whatnot in order to keep getting this public assistance. And the William Dafoe is playing an extremely sympathetic, I mean, you usually don't think of him as being a sympathetic character, but he's this extremely sympathetic motel manager who's trying his best to help them. But the mother has just got her own problems, and she's making very bad choices. She's not making evil choices. She's doing it, again, we're going back to the thing of you do something for a good reason, but it's a bad thing that you do. And it's really got one of the most moving and heartbreaking endings I've seen to a movie. But this thing, it's literally shot almost in one location entirely. Super cheap. I mean, no sets. Everything was an actual physical location. And it's just a marvelous movie. I mean, if you've got one of these at home, just write a good story that you can do on this and put it together, and it's on YouTube, it's on Vimeo, it's wherever you want it to be. There's nothing holding you back.
Yep. Truth. Get it done.
Well, like Colleen put this together. There you go. It's exactly like we're here having this conversation at this exact thing. This was her doing. Yeah.
For sure. Sure. Thank you both for being here. It's your doing for being here and sharing your stories and your time. I really appreciate it. You both are fantastic artists. Thank you for inspiring the cell phone movies out there and just keeping on doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I need to wrap this up, I think. And so thank you both for being a part of this. And, we'll keep looking out for your independent and awesome art. So
I'll follow Buzz everywhere. I'm telling you, you're missing out on all the Buzz Dixonry.
I'm going to be looking over my shoulder now.
We'll buy t-shirts.
Exactly. And thank you, Colleen. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I enjoyed this. Thank you.
All right. You guys have a good one. Bye.
Okay.